Hi, I'm Heather O'Neill, and this is my When Ethics and Policies Collide slideshow and video. So the first question I looked at is, what steps should be taken to ensure others act ethically? As I read the case study, I definitely was torn in many directions. You know, as a leader and an administrator, I would set the example with my own behavior of acting ethically. During staff meetings, always setting that bar high, discussing morals and ethics, and making it a part of the everyday culture. That way, it's not a question of, well, what should we do? That it's an automatic behavior. I would influence policy where I could to allow team members the flexibility necessary to avoid a situation like this. If staff members have the chance to handle situations in an ethical manner, then we're not pigeonholed kind of into this black and white situation, by the policy says this, because as we know as educators, there's a lot of gray area. So so the next one, what steps should be taken to ensure others act ethically? So in this case study, I believe that happens to be you as the administrator standing firm in your beliefs. I know that you're at an uphill battle at this point because the policy states one thing, but you as a human being have to know that that is morally and ethically not the correct way to handle this, that by ruining this child's future academic success, who shouldn't be in trouble, it's definitely not an ethical way to handle this. I'd be willing to take the reprimand in order to set the correct example for my students and my adults and any other stakeholders in the community. What do you do when you recognize when ethics have been breached, and what appropriate actions do you take? First off, I have a military background, and I would always follow the chain of command, because I feel like then, you're going to your direct boss and so forth, and then I would elevate the situation as far as I needed in order to achieve, the ethical outcome that should be met. I'm definitely one that's very passionate about situations and about my students, and my staff definitely know, my paras currently know that if it's the right thing for my students, I definitely will fight hard until I'm, have been given a direct answer and there is no more to take the issue. But I would definitely begin communicating with my school representative in order to protect myself too. So in this case, that means I would be communicating with my leaders throughout the process and let them know I understand the situation and policies in place, but morally I completely disagree with the policy in this particular situation. I would gather all of the facts and the history of both of the students in order to make my case for not following the policy, stating that the one student, is in honors classes. He's participates in the band. He's never had any run-ins, with the principle of being in trouble. And so by following this policy, we would definitely be ruining his academic success, future academic success, by punishing him when he was pretty much in an impossible situation. How do you hold yourself and others accountable for ethical behavior? Again, I've stated this many times, as a leader, you make it part of the culture. My staff definitely know that that I do things the right way every time, no matter what. And so that's where it comes in that I lead by example. And I think that that's important for you as an administrator, to show your staff that you're not just preaching this to them of what they should be doing, but you're showing them. We talked about some other things in this leadership class about, what type of leader are you? And so, I'm definitely a transformational and a participative leader, but, across the board, no matter what type of leader you are, I think that setting high expectations is definitely, a way to get your staff to be, pushing themselves to meet your personal high expectations. And if unethical behavior is found, then the situation must be addressed. And this could be done in a, sit-down meeting with the individual staff member. There's many ways that this could be handled depending on the situation. Some things could be handled in a meeting setting, a staff meeting setting, without giving the particulars. But usually a one-on-one setting is definitely best. And then if unethical behavior is beyond your responsibility or my responsibility as in this case, assistant principal or the administrator, then I must alert the proper leadership, whether that would be the head principal, the superintendent, the school board, and beyond that. How do you address unethical behaviors as it may adversely affect students and adults? So, previously I just stated that I would have a sit-down meeting with that adult, if it was another staff member or a student, in this case, who presented the unethical behavior, and share with them my thoughts, concerns, and the policy that, our school has in place for this type of behavior. If the unethical behavior is dictated by policy, then I would make policy adjustments, if possible. Obviously, as an assistant principal, you're pretty low on the chain of command, but you definitely are going to have a voice in making some of those policy adjustments if something doesn't seem to be appropriate. If the policy adjustments are not possible, then I would make policy suggestions to my chain of command. Again, being low man on the totem pole, sometimes you don't have the power to make the ultimate change, but your chain of command should be listening to you, and so making those suggestions and giving valid reasons of why you're making that suggestion with some background history and information would be important. The same as the previous slide, how do you address unethical behaviors as it may adversely affect students and adults? I feel like, if this, as the administrator, if I were talking with an adult, I would handle it, a little bit different than if I were dealing with a student. In this situation, with the student, my focus moves to more of that teaching role versus a disciplinary role. And I'm not saying that there wouldn't be some disciplinary action, but I do think it's important that you teach along the way of why it's unethical, why their behavior, was inappropriate. And then the situation, I think it's important to follow the policy, but take the opportunity to teach, about that behavior, and let them know what possibly they could have done in the future to remedy the situation. And so in this case, David seemed to be in an impossible situation. I mean, he felt threatened if he didn't take the brass knuckles, and, so ethically he should have reported the pass of the brass knuckles right away to an adult. But, it sounds like that he's in a pretty rough school, and that doesn't seem like it would be a simple response to this situation. Because he would have repercussions, not because of a disciplinary, but for his own personal safety. So it's important to recognize that reporting could have caused him harm. And as the administrator, knowing the environment of that school, I would have spoken to each student separately. So that way, he didn't feel threatened. He wasn't, stressed even more than he was, as was presented when he was brought into the office. And then that way, each of these cases could be kept separate. And I think that was where the administrator made the mistake, because by bringing them in together, the action got lumped into one disciplinary action instead of being a separate incident. How do you employ ethical decision-making practices regarding policies? When writing policy as an administrator, there is no situation that fits in a black and white mold. So I feel like there should be some flexibility written into those policies for administrators to handle situations really exactly like this. As an administrator, I personally need the freedom and the flexibility to handle situations as I see fit. I know that I couldn't make a policy statement that would fit every situation that I'm going to be presented as an administrator. I definitely know there's not one, that fits everything that I come across as a teacher. And so by having that flexibility to handle situations as, maybe the teacher sees fit at a lower level, or as the administrator seems, fits, based on moral and ethical beliefs, and knowing my students, and based on, basing that on the relationships that I've built with them, and knowing their history and their background, I think is an important point to make, that knowing these students definitely keeps it even farther away, I feel like, from a black and white situation. How do you employ ethical decision-making practices regarding policy? Again, this flexibility ensures that cases like this don't ruin a student's future academic success. Flexibility also allows teachers and administrators to collaborate to make the best decision for students, and collaboration allows staff to grow, learn, and pursue creative approaches to situations. How do you promote ethical behavior among faculty, staff, and students? As an administrator, when I'm developing the core beliefs and mission statements with my staff, integrity has to be a part of that conversation and be a part of the beliefs. During the staff meeting and trainings, we focus on integrity and ethical behavior, again, making it part of that culture. That focus helps to make it part of that culture, and it becomes a natural behavior for staff. So when reflecting back on this case, it truly reinforced my belief in doing the right thing regardless of the situation. This seems to be a situation that is unique and maybe one that, in my community I don't face often, or many administrators don't face often in their career, but there are definitely plenty of situations that do not fall in that black and white category, that don't just fall under, the policy written into the student handbook. And so this made me think of that proper chain of command and how a situation like this would need to be handled. This made me think of, I'm so passionate, and I'm, about my students and how I would do, I'm extremely passionate, about my students. And, my staff know that I would do whatever is best for them. They've heard me preach that many, many times. And so there's plenty of situations I've dug my heels in as a teacher and gone to class with a student that I didn't think was being treated fairly. That was sitting in a choir class to ensure that my student was treated equal to everybody else. And, there's many other situations along my career that I've, kind of dug my heels in and always done what's right for students no matter what. And I feel like as an administrator, that's where this kind of makes me come back to and think of, my time as a teacher and just how much I would need to do this as an administrator, because some of these students may not have anyone else in their corner.